It's hard to believe that anyone would think half hanging out of a helicopter, completely exposed, while firing at an enemy actively trying to shoot you down was the best job you could get. Yet, thousands of young men found themselves doing exactly that in one of the scariest and most dangerous roles of an already brutal war. Today we're talking about helicopter door gunners to show you what their life in the Vietnam War was really like. Let's begin. When American helicopters first arrived in Vietnam, they were essentially flying taxis, operated by three-man crews of pilot, co-pilot, and crew chief. They were carrying equipment and soldiers, essentially like standard cargo trucks that could fly, unarmed and unarmored. They were operating under the naive assumption that air mobility alone would give them the edge over an enemy on the ground. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Almost half of the deployed helicopters in the whole Vietnam War would crash, and enemy fire was of course one of the main reasons for that. After watching defenseless birds get shot down at an alarming rate, the military brass thought that maybe helicopters flying into combat zones should have some way to shoot back. The first improvisation was quick and simple. Take the doors off and strap in a crew chief with an M60 machine gun. Crew chiefs would fire from the open doorway while the helicopter banked and swerved. The effectiveness was questionable, the danger to the gunner undeniable, but it was better than nothing. Then, to cover the opposite side from the crew chief, the dedicated door gunner position was born, famously called the shotgun rider. Besides covering one of your flanks with heavy machine gun fire, the door gunner watched for the rotor blades and skids to be safe from obstructions. He also came in handy as an additional crew member to help with anything that might happen during the various missions they might get. Loading and unloading of supplies or wounded, maintaining the guns and helicopter, and of course, providing heavy suppression when things got hairy, which could happen unexpectedly at any time. Although it seems like the door gunner was just put there to blindly fire the gun, he was actually very well trained to function with the crew and helicopter as one. He also had to make adjustments to his fire, as he was firing from a helicopter moving at high speed at moving targets in the jungle below, and it is far more difficult than it looks. Gunners had to lead their targets, aiming ahead of where they wanted to hit because bullets fired from a moving helicopter carry the forward momentum of the aircraft. As enemy fire continued to take a toll, the military realized they needed a more systematic approach. The M60 machine guns were then mounted on pintle or swivel mounts in the doorways, allowing for more stable firing from a fast-moving and vibrating platform while maintaining the wide angle the gunner could cover. Some gunners preferred to fire from their hands, or tying M60s to bungee cords hanging from the ceiling so they'd have maximum field of fire. Machine guns immediately proved to be a valuable asset on Hueys. Thus began the "let's see what else we can strap to this thing" phase of helicopter evolution. Innovative crews began experimenting with additional weapon mounts, rocket pods, miniguns, and even grenade launchers. They were not entirely following any military regulation, but proved to be undeniably effective, so much that the military would see their potential and begin developing purpose-built gunships. The UH-1B and later UH-1C models were specifically configured as gunships, with multiple weapon systems like rocket pods, forward-firing machine guns, or M134 miniguns firing 6,000 rounds per minute, etc. This evolution eventually culminated in the development of the AH-1 Cobra, the first ever attack helicopter. For helicopter crews and their door gunners, there wasn't a typical day. As they said, 90% of the time was endless boredom, flying hundreds of hours staring into the jungle with nothing going on. But in those other 10%, you'd be wishing to be bored again when absolute horror kicked in. But before we go into combat, listen to this. Because you're dangling from a helicopter traveling at 100 miles per hour, sometimes just little above the treetops, you might think it would be smart to secure yourself from falling out. If you're wondering, yes, they did fall out sometimes. And yes, sometimes with fatal consequences. The basic safety was a standard lap belt, similar to what you'd find in a car. The preferred choice for most gunners, however, was the monkey harness, a military safety harness worn on the torso and anchored to the helicopter's floor or cabin wall. It gave you the option to move around or lean out of the helicopter for better firing angle while still being relatively safe from falling out. Not exactly safe from falling out, but more to not die when you do fall out. Monkey straps were designed to keep you hanging in the air until your crew members had time to pull you back in. You might want to change your pants after that. Helicopters had to make sharp maneuvers to avoid enemy fire, and if hit and lost control, centrifugal force could shoot you right out. The door gunner's position was the least popular in the helicopter, and for a good reason. That infamous life expectancy in combat for door gunners was 5 minutes, and while those statistics are not actually the most accurate in the world, 5 minutes does not give a great impression of the job. Door gunners did suffer the highest casualty rates of helicopter crews, as they were in the most exposed position, and also the enemy knew it would be smarter to shoot them first, as they were a direct threat to them. As we said, door gunners performed a variety of missions, each bringing its own set of challenges and dangers. Medical evacuation missions carried out by so-called dust-offs were among the most dangerous and difficult missions, as you're racing against time to find and save the wounded, while enemy knew that you'd fly in during the engagement. Normally, dust-offs were marked with a big red cross and flew unarmed, as they should be neutral by the so-called rules of war. However, as the United States didn't follow many such rules and conventions, using napalm, strategic bombing, and even biological weapons, so the other side equally didn't care much about your red cross sign on the helicopter. Then dust-offs also got their door gunners for personal protection while flying directly into active combat zones to pick up wounded. Door gunners helped with loading the wounded, even jumping out in hostile territory to help bring them to the helicopter. They also had to do this multiple times, flying back and forth between evacuation hospital and battlefield, as casualties could mount in dozens and they couldn't pick up all at once. They also had to choose who would go first and who could wait the next turn based on the seriousness of their injuries. When ground forces were pinned down or on the verge of being overrun, helicopters became their last hope. Door gunners would lay down suppressive fire while the helicopter flew in at great speed, touching down just while soldiers scrambled aboard. They could hear bullets whizzing around them and hitting the helicopter, just waiting for one to hit them. Many door gunners continued to lay fire despite being mortally wounded themselves, fighting literally till their last breath. There was an incident when a helicopter fired at enemy spotted on the ground and then landed to investigate. A young door gunner noticed a wounded soldier still alive and without thinking jumped out to bring him on the helicopter. However, he forgot to tell his crew about his plan, and as he picked the wounded soldier on his shoulder, he turned around and saw his bird flying away without him. He was without radio or weapon, standing completely alone with a wounded enemy on his shoulder in the middle of hostile territory. After about 20 minutes, he could hear a helicopter approaching at great speed as his crew realized that he was missing. When the crew chief was done with severe screaming at him for leaving his position, he was happy that they found him before the enemy did. Now let's talk about the door gunner's protection, or as veterans might say, what protection? Since helicopters needed to remain as light as possible, adding heavy bulletproof shields was out of the question. The helicopter itself wasn't bulletproof, so shields would have been a nice thought, but largely pointless. Bullets easily penetrated the aircraft's skin, and door gunners worked in open doorways with nothing between them and enemy fire. Flak jackets were standard issue but designed primarily to stop shrapnel and were useless against AK rounds. Most gunners didn't even wear them because they were heavy and too uncomfortable in the tropical heat, while offering little real protection. Flight helmets were mostly for communication with the crew, while ceramic chest armor, known as chicken plates, could stop small arms fire. The nickname itself said a lot about how gunners saw them, and since they were heavy, many preferred mobility over extra armor. So in practice, the only protection for the gunners was their own firepower and speed. Fly in, do what you must, and get out as soon as possible, while the gunners fired continuously, stopping only to clear a jam or help someone. Door gunners served as the eyes and ears of the crew, scanning the ground for any sign of enemy activity. And you're doing that without night vision, thermal imaging, or fancy optics, while moving over jungle in which is an enemy that is a master at camouflage. When you spot something unusual on the ground, you have only seconds to decide whether it's the enemy or just a farmer in the wrong place at the wrong time. Adding to the complexity, some of Viet Cong fighters were as young as 12 years old, and the enemy tried hard to blend in with the local population. Gunners couldn't really tell what they were hitting or who was hiding in the trees below. It's no wonder that tragic incidents occurred, whether deliberately or by accident, that gave helicopters and their gunners some sort of controversy later after the war. Nearly all helicopter crews saw their friends die in combat right beside them, making them some of the most traumatized veterans of the Vietnam War. Nevertheless, the young and incredibly brave helicopter crews and their gunners pioneered combat tactics that would shape military doctrine for decades.